What's up, guys, and welcome back to the infamous project. Exciting day here today because finally, and I mean finally because I've been waiting for months. If you look here behind me on the old deck lid to the Yellow DECH notch, aka workbench whale tail, I'm sure War Admiral would be happy to see I'm putting it to good use. Anyways, the yellow Konis have finally arrived, and they are valved to DECH OG specifications that they used back in the day. So huge thank you to Peter Hanson himself from Hanson International. So we're gonna get these installed in the car, and we've also got a set of DECH grabbers that we can install as well. So the car is already on the lift, and it'll be probably the first time you guys will be able to see a little bit of the underside. So the underside of this car, right, is an undercoated Canadian car, which is kind of nasty. So it's not the prettiest on the underside, but there isn't really much for corrosion other than some scale and stuff on the exhaust. But let's get the car up in the air. We'll hit the intro while I'm getting it up, and we'll take a closer look on the underside, and we'll start tackling this project. So the car's up in the air. Before we look underneath there, let's look at the products that we're going to be installing on the car. So here are the yellow Konis in the flesh, made in Holland. And here's a set of DECH grabbers. So we'll get into these in a minute in case you guys do not know what these are or how they bolt on. You are going to see firsthand some of the knobs and adjusters and stuff and hardware that come with them. Then we got, of course, the boxes sitting down there with the other two struts and shocks. So, looking on the underside here, I am going to have to get this rectified and the other MagnaFlow tips that I have. So, this was actually a fix that was done by the Georgetown shop because the exhaust that was, or the tailpipes that were on the car when I got it, they had like pipe strap around something pulling the tip over to keep it from rubbing the tire, and it was a little bit of an ordeal. So I got this done as a temporary solution just to, keep the tires from rubbing the pipes. First things first, we got the DECH Panhard bar. So super cool piece to have, right? A little bit of the powder coat starting to come off in a few spots. The right thing to do would be taking it off completely and having it repowder coated. However, we got pits on our mind here, so the Panhard bar is going to stay. The rear lower control arms here, these I believe are SVO arms that have a thicker bushing, if I remember correctly on that. I'm going to have to double check so I don't put my foot in my mouth when I say that, but that was an option that DECH did. And of course you can see the underside's pretty much all black from undercoat spray and everything else. The car does have subframe connectors. It does have a drive shaft safety loop. And you can see this was all painted at one point, and now it's just kind of scaly and scabby. Nothing really to worry about. It just kind of looks worse than it actually is, right? But one thing's for sure, this exhaust sounds great. And this was the old trick back in the day, right? You took the factory heat shields and you welded them around your off-road H-pipe, so it looked like you had cats when you in fact do not. So that is that. Got the DECH G-load brace in the front here, and that actually has stamped little plaque with DECH. You can see got a couple little oil leaks and whatnot, as you would, old car, but it is what it is. And we got our DECH springs in the front. And if you haven't noticed, this car actually still has stock shocks and struts. So what we'll be doing is shocks and struts. We will be doing some modifications spring-wise. We'll be talking about the springs later in the video. We'll replace what we can and get everything tidied up as much as needed so that we can make sure that we make it to pits. Still got the old dog bone on the back here, and it looks like we have a leak. Pinion seal. So yeah, that's never fun. So maybe a diff service, maybe it's just leaking because it sat so long. I don't know, but I will be removing this unneeded weight from the rear end, and we'll go from there. So in terms of suspension, guys, it's pretty much standard operating procedure. Obviously, I'm going to start with the back because I want to deal with the control arms and get the holes drilled for the grabbers. And in case you guys are wondering how the grabbers go, well, I'm going to show you once I get the wheels and tires off. I'm going to drop the shocks down, probably get the rear springs out, and then from there, I'll show you exactly what we're working with and what we're going to get done. In case you're wondering, the old DeWalt electric, because, well, my Milwaukee is at the commercial shop, so whatever. Corded tool. Okay, so the shock is off, the shock mount is off, and here's the grabber. And the grabber goes on just like so, and will line up with that rear shock hole. And that rear shock hole is kind of going to be our guide plate. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put it back in now, and then I'll show you exactly what's going to go on here. So what we want to do is we want to actually push the grabber as high up as we can so that it's touching the base of the axle tube, just like that, okay? And then we are going to tighten the shock mount down. I can't really do it with one hand. So, and the key is we're gonna have to bend this in with a hammer once we're done so that it hits or sticks in the hole, but you get the idea. So let me get two hands on this and we'll show you the next step. So again, the key is to have the grabber pretty much butt up against the weld of the diff tube. It's like right there, okay? And then what we're going to do after that is drill these holes on both sides. All right, well, as the camera died, I did get the bolts through, and this grabber is pretty much in position and ready for the new Koni in the back and for the bolts to get tightened up. But since a day has actually gone past, something cool has just arrived. So here is another set of original DECH grabbers, and here are some newly made ones that I had fabricated to mimic the original grabber. The main difference here is that technology today is, if you look at these guys, there's some pretty interesting bends and contours about them. And as a result, they needed to build these out of 3 pieces. So they had the 2 ends here and then the back, which were welded together. Today, can actually use 1 full piece of steel, same thickness, and it's all in 1 piece, which means no welds, and still manage to retain all of the fancy bends. So I am actually going to do a test fit here because I need to send these off to Peter Hanson himself. Said hopefully he can give the okay to say, you know what, Tip, we can launch these guys back in the market. So I had these powder coated yellow, not just because I like yellow, but because I wanted to make sure that, right, we knew what a prototype was versus a real part. So if these do go back into production, then they will be in red, and you will know that they are the new version because, again, 1 piece versus 3 pieces. So I've actually got 2 sets of these made. You can see the other set sitting on the floor over there by another set of grabbers that are specific to the ASG setup, some G-load braces, and another set of springs. But let's go ahead and try and bolt these guys on and see how they look. And more importantly, do they fit? So on this side, you can see the shock mount doesn't line up, and that's because they actually welded this and drilled out the hole further a little bit over to the right, and that was to give the shock clearance from the heim joint here on the panhard bar. So we have to do a little clearance in here, so we could probably do something similar, or I don't know if the grabber actually moving this back some might actually give us enough clearance. So maybe I can just drill the control arm back more factory-ish, which is what I actually think will probably work. Well, it's been a few days, but managed to get the passenger side DECH version 2 prototype bracket on. And this is in the exact same holes as the original DECH grabber was bolted into. So I bolted that on first, took it off, and you know, this hole for the shock mount is offset. That was welded and moved over a little bit to accommodate the panhard bar set up here so that this wouldn't hit the shock assembly. I've since looked at the clearance and everything is going to be fine. So I'll get this sorted out when I put the original grabber back on. But these guys are going to be good to go. I just want to get a little bit more material on the top side here so that they do butt right up against the axle housing. So that way, or the axle tube, and that way there'll be, right, no uncertainties in terms of where to drill the holes, because you'll just butt that right up against the weld in there, and then you'll know exactly where to line up your holes and drill. So hopefully the Peter gives the okay on these guys, and then they can go into production, and there'll be the DECH version like this, and then there might actually be an infamous project variant that will not be DECH, it will be DECH influenced based off this. There will be an option for you guys as well, so make sure you stay tuned for that. So right now I'm going to go ahead, unbolt this off, put the DECH one back on, and then we're going to get into springs. So interesting fact that I've learned here, that the DECH Consumer Orientation Release, which lists two different types of springs. It lists a high performance spring and it lists a competition spring. From there, DECH actually had a different spring that had its own consumer orientation release that came out after the fact, which was known as the Speed Drive spring. It was over 1,000 pounds per inch in terms of the spring to weight load ratio. So here is a factory front coil spring, all right, V8. Here is one of the DECH original style springs. Now this lowers, I believe, 38 millimeters, about 1.5 inches, and this was known as the high performance spring. And then this guy here, which is extremely lower, but if you were to put this in place of this, this actually isn't really going to drop your car that much more, because if you can actually look at the thickness of the coils on that guy versus this guy, right? This is a beefier coil. The outer diameter of this material is much stronger, therefore much stiffer. So what we have here, right? Same thing goes for the rear. So the rear is the high performance DECH spring. And I've learned that the competition spring that is featured on the consumer orientation release was actually never made by DECH. It was actually an Eibach race spring that was used back in the day, that was offered as an option for people on the road course. Otherwise, the only two DECH branded spring types were the high performance, which would have been a set of these guys right here, front and rear, and then the speed drives, which typically would use this in conjunction with the high performance rear spring, because rear springs, guys, they're all within, you know, that 2 to 200 pound, 2 to 300 range at most. And then the fronts, well, they vary anywhere from, I believe this guy's a starting rate around 400, ending 5 some. This guy is starting at 700 and change, or 800 and change, ending up at upwards of 1500. So extremely aggressive spring here. This is what was in DECH number 5. Up in the air over there, it is also in the SN95 car that is there. And I believe, I think that's it. I don't know what's in DECH number 9. I need to double check that. However, what we are going to do, here's the 2 rear springs that came out of the yellow car here. And they're okay. A little bit of overspray, a little bit of rust and corrosion. These are the same as these that I had powder coated. So the question is now what I'm going to do. And oh, sorry guys. See this spring hiding over here? This one's a little bit taller. This one is usually used with an ASG rear setup in the rear. And if you had your ASG in the rear, you would have had a speed drive spring in the front. So the SN95 car has these springs in the rear, and DECH number 5 has those springs in the rear. You can tell by the amount of extra dead coils in the bottom here. Dead coils mean coils that touch one another. Active coils are coils that are not touching each other underneath any types of load. So there's a little bit of spring information for you guys. My plan for this car here, because we need to lower it down some, and I'm going to do something sacrificial. I'm going to cut a set of the high performance DECH springs. The question is, do I cut the fancy new powder coated ones, or do I cut the ones that were already in the car? That is a choice that I need to make. I think for the purpose of this exercise, I'm probably going to cut the ones that were in the car. And hopefully I won't be cutting out anything that says DECH on it, because I'll probably be taking a coil, at least a coil to coil and a half out of the rear. Probably one. If I cut here, that means I'm cutting through the DECH logo, which I really don't want to do. So what I'll probably do is maybe take it to about there, and then that should get me enough drop. That combined with the DECH grabber, dropping us down about 3/4 of an inch, will probably get us where we want to sit. I don't want to go ultra low on this guy. I want to find the ultimate ride height that is built off a DECH spring. Cutting these springs is going to increase the spring rate, but I'm okay with that. I'm looking for something that's lower. The spring rate will be a little bit stiffer without being like speed drive track style stiff. And same thing's going to go for the front. We're going to be removing the front isolators. We're going to be removing some coil material out of those guys as well. And at that point, hopefully we'll find the ultimate ride height, spring rates. And I'm going to be driving the car up to K Designs hopefully next week up in Waco. So it'll be a perfect little shakedown thing to test out the springs, see how I feel about them. Did I make a mistake by cutting them? Or is everything okay? Now, you guys might be like, man, you're cutting original DECH springs. Well, good news. I'm hoping to actually be able to have the original DECH springs reproduced and available to market here shortly. So I am actually doing this as a prototype, some R&D, so that I can have a DECH influenced suspension that goes along with the infamous Project brand, right? So where a DECH car would have its traditional ride height and everything stays true to, right, an original car like number 5 or number 9 or like the SN95 up there, that's great. But in true infamous Project fashion, I want to be able to have something that's an offering somewhat similar to you see on my white DECH clone up here. And that, just in case you guys are wondering, is actually, there's max springs in that car that have been cut down because Peter was like, don't cut DECH springs. And well, I'm okay with cutting DECH springs now because, well, I'm going to be able to replace them. So that is what we got to do sometimes, guys. Sometimes we got to do some sacrificial stuff in order to be able to bring new product to market and do some changes and come up with new innovation. And that's exactly what DECH did. DECH messed around with Ford Motorsport springs. They messed around with iBox springs. They went through different, all linear progressive rates, all of the things in order to figure out what was the best deal for performance on the street and on the track. And, you know, now I'm going to take it one step further to get stuff that's on the street with a little bit more low. Especially, you got to remember, guys, when DECH was around, 16-inch wheels were the norm. 17 if you were lucky. Now guys are pushing 18-inch wheels, which means we're automatically raising up the car a little bit. So by having a spring that's going to go a little bit lower with your 18-inch wheel is really not a bad thing at the end of the day. So that's pretty much it. I could probably do a whole video just on the spring stuff, and I probably will once I get this all figured out, but there is the taste specific to the springs. Now let me get back at the car, get the grabber installed, cut some rear coils out, get the rear end all back together, get the diff cover back on, and then we can finally move on to the front of this car. Got the springs roughly seated in place here. Got the orientation right where I want them to sit in the pockets. And now, actually this Koni can get bolted on, and just need to put the car down so I can get the bolt on the top, get rid of this old collapsed shock here that is now useless, and get the yellow Koni in. And actually get our quads on, brakes back on, and well, gotta get the diff cover back on, and we're getting there. Well, here's the quad shock mount. The sleeve from the original quad shock was like fused on there. So cut it loose with a Dremel. We'll clean this up, bolt it back on, and should be good as new. This is what I like, right? See how there's a little bit of tension on this spring with all the weight off of the rear diff. That's usually your quad shocks help out tremendously with that, and it means that if we go over a big bump, we're not going to lose our coil spring or knock it loose or anything. If you start cutting more material than that, then you get into the liabilities. Not to say I haven't done that before, but just something to keep in mind. Koni yellow shocks, Koni red quad shocks, panhard bar still in place, DECH grabbers installed, got this Eibach rear sway bar that I had off a parts car, and that has been, I guess, a nice little upgrade, add to the red theme. Diff cover cleaned, painted, reinstalled, get a top off, get some fresh fluid in there, and other than that, maybe we'll make sure the emergency brake lines are tied up and out of the way. But other than that, guys, that is it. Got nice rebuilt rear end. All right, I think we nailed it. Again, we're not going for ultra slammed on this car. Things will settle down a little bit, but in terms of, all right, wheel to clearance and everything else, I think we are like bang on. So we do not have rolled fenders in this scenario, and we should be okay as long as that rear end doesn't have any slop in it. I think we're good. These are 18 by 10 ET17 running a 265/35/18. So pretty aggressive with the offset. However, we are running our quad shocks and everything is functional and they're the way that it should be. Looks like we got some pretty good travel here on the suspension. So now it's time to knock out the front and get the front sitting the way that we want so that it complements the rear here. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much bang on. I couldn't really ask for a better stance than that one right there. So now's the big moment of truth. We get to put the car back down on the ground, see how it sits. I was pretty comfortable with the rear. The front is always a bit of toss-up because there's always some settling that needs to happen there. So fingers crossed, I nailed it the first go around. Otherwise, you never know, might have to undo some of the front end components again and try and level stuff out. But no isolators in the front, one full coil cut. Koni is installed. I cut the bump stops down in half so that way there's just a little bit more give in there. So let's go ahead and let the hoist down. Looks pretty good. Well, at first glance, things are looking pretty good. Like I said, these fronts will probably settle down a little bit once we hit a couple bumps. And all right, so we're not totally slammed here, but we're definitely leveled out and looking good. I'm hoping that this comes down maybe, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch. And I feel like if it does that in terms of its settling, we will be in really good shape. So we'll be in a position to dial in our Konis. I've already turned them pretty much all the way up. And then we can finish off some stuff in the engine bay here, and hopefully this car is going to be ready for action. Here's all the grossly stock, undercoated, painted, coatings, rusty tank straps. Swap those out. Dog bone off the diff and the factory strut shocks, drive shaft, all that stuff, rear sway bar. All of that is now out of the car and replaced with all brand new shiny parts. So now the underside is starting to look as clean as the top side of the car. So we're pretty much there. I've already got my exhaust shop appointment booked for next Wednesday to get my 4-inch MagnaFlow tips welded on the back and get those straight on the angle that I want. I'm waiting for Red Dog to drop off the TLS 5 spoiler for the back, and then it's off to Waco to see Mr. Keith at K Designs to get the trunk outfitted with the rest of the stereo equipment. So the car is almost there. So that's going to be probably a wrap for this video, because with the last little couple of bits, the only thing left will be a final reveal. So stick around. We'll see you here next time on the Infamous Project.